to Loom of Dreams. This is a place where stories are woven softly, thread by thread, until they become a blanket of quiet comfort around you. Before we begin tonight's story, let's take a few moments to settle the body and quiet the mind. If you'd like, close your eyes now. Let the rest of the world fade a little. Notice where you are, the shape of the room, the stillness of the air, the gentle warmth that surrounds you. Now, take a slow breath in through your nose. Feel your chest lift and your belly rise. And then slowly breathe out through your mouth, as if you're blowing warm air onto a window. Let your shoulders drop and feel that breath leave gently, like a sigh. Again, inhale softly, not too deep, just enough to feel the cool air enter. Pause for a moment and exhale slowly. Each time you breathe, imagine the air moving like a wave, in and out, steady and kind. Your body begins to understand this rhythm, the same rhythm as a calm sea at night, the same rhythm as the fire in the hearth. If your mind begins to wander, that's perfectly fine. Just notice it and bring it back to your breath, back to the sound of the fire, back to the quiet in your room. Now feel your body growing heavier, your hands resting loosely, your jaw unclenching, your eyes softening behind closed lids. Let your breath find its own pace. There's nothing you need to do. You are safe, you are home, and you are ready to rest. Tonight, we're going back to a small town tucked between Norway's snowy fjords. Outside, the world is wrapped in white, but inside a little bakery, the ovens are glowing and fresh bread fills the air with warmth. We'll follow Liv through this winter morning, from the quiet clink of cups and the scent of herbs, to the first hint of a secret greenhouse warmed by the hot springs beneath the hill. So make yourself comfortable. Let your shoulders soften, and let this gentle winter story guide you towards sleep. The morning began in quiet shades of blue and white. The Fjord town still half asleep under its heavy winter quilt, and the snow outside was falling in slow, steady curtains, softening every roof and fence and boat along the shore. Inside the little bakery, though, the day was already awake. Ovens hummed gently, radiating a deep, comforting warmth. And the first trays of bread had just come out, lining the counter with golden loaves and soft, flour-dusted rolls. Liv stood in the back kitchen, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, cheeks faintly pink from the heat. She moved carefully between the racks, sliding loaves from their pans, turning them so the crust could breathe, listening for that tiny crackle that meant the bread was cooling just right. The air around her was dense with the smell of butter and yeast and toasted grain, the kind of scent that wrapped itself around your shoulders and refused to let go. Every now and then, Liv glanced toward the front of the shop. Through the open doorway, she could see the big display window, its glass blurred with rings of condensation, like someone had painted soft halos over the town. Beyond that, through the fogged glass, there was only whiteness and the faint, almost dreamlike shapes of snow-covered houses on the other side of the street. The world out there felt distant and muffled, as if the snow had wrapped the whole town in a heavy, quiet blanket. Inside, though, there was the scratch of paper bags, the clink of cups, her mother's low, friendly voice greeting the first customers of the day. Liv set a basket of rolls onto the counter in the back and wiped her hands on her apron. It felt like any other winter morning in the bakery, ordinary, gentle, almost predictable. This was the kind of day when root vegetables simmered in soup pots, carrots and potatoes and turnips that had slept all winter in cellars, waiting to be chopped and stewed and turned into something warm. She was reaching for another tray when a sudden sound drifted in from the front, the delicate chime of the little bell above the door. It rang once, then again as the door swung wider and a breath of icy air slid across the floor, curling around her ankles. Liv looked up. From where she stood, she couldn't see the door itself, only the slight sway of the lantern near the entrance and the way the fog on the window shifted as colder air pushed in. The smell of snow crept into the bakery, sharp and clean, carrying the faintest hint of the sea. Her mother's voice floated back to her, warm and welcoming. "Good morgen," she said, with that soft, familiar rhythm. A deeper voice answered, a little rougher around the edges, like someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. She recognized it even before she saw him. Knut, the older man from town who always seemed to know the weather before it arrived, and who appeared as if by instinct just when someone needed help lifting something heavy or repairing a broken fence post. He stepped into view a moment later, framed in the doorway to the back. Snow clung in tiny crystals on his wool hat and on the shoulders of his dark coat. And in his gloved hands he was carrying a wooden crate, the sides worn smooth from years of use. A piece of rough beige burlap was draped over the top like a blanket, hiding whatever lay inside. Liv's first thought was automatic. Probably more winter roots, she told herself silently. Perhaps a delivery from someone's storage cellar. This was the season of things that kept well in the cold, the sturdy, patient vegetables that waited months before finally making their way to a chopping board. She was reaching for another tray when Knut shifted the crate onto a nearby work table. The burlap cloth slipped just a little at the corner. For an instant, the fabric lifted with his movement, and a thin edge of color peeked out from underneath. Not the dull orange of carrots, not the dusty brown of potatoes, but a small, fresh stroke of green. Bright, tender, almost glowing against the worn wood. Liv's breath caught just slightly. She took a step closer without even realizing, eyes narrowing as she tried to make sense of it. Green like that didn't belong to this time of year. Not in a town that had been buried under snow for weeks. Not when every garden was sleeping under a thick, icy coverlet. Her mother laughed softly at something Knut had said and lifted the cloth the rest of the way. The burlap fell back and the whole crate filled the air with a different kind of smell. Fresh, cool, alive. Inside, packed carefully together, were armfuls of herbs and leaves in every shade of green. Feathery fronds of dill, small sprigs of thyme, glossy leaves of kale and lettuce that looked as though they had just been cut moments ago. Tiny beads of water clung to the stems, catching the bakery light and turning into tiny, shimmering stars. Liv stared, utterly still. For a heartbeat, it felt like the world had flipped. Outside, a snowstorm was painting everything white and gray. Inside this wooden crate, it was as if a slice of spring had quietly arrived without anyone asking permission. Her mind scrambled for an explanation. Maybe they'd been shipped in from far away. Maybe some delivery truck had fought its way through the snow from a city market. But the leaves looked too delicate, too recently touched by human hands. There was something about them that felt local and secret and impossibly new. In a town completely wrapped in winter, that sudden burst of green felt almost unreasonable. Unreasonable and irresistible. Somewhere deep inside her, curiosity stirred, a small, bright spark, like the first new shoot pushing up through the soil, even while the snow is still falling overhead. The hours that followed slipped by in their usual rhythm, slow in some moments, busy in others. The snow outside thickened, drifting lazily past the bakery window in endless swirling patterns, while inside the warmth and the fragrance of baking settled into every corner. The crate of greens stayed near the back counter, resting on a sturdy wooden table. Every time Liv passed it, another breath of that cool green scent rose up to meet her, cutting through the richer notes of butter and sugar, like a small open window in the middle of winter. Her mother moved with practiced ease around it, as if this was nothing out of the ordinary. She lifted handfuls of herbs and sorted them into smaller baskets, setting aside one with delicate sprigs for the day's sandwiches, another with broader leaves for the soup pot that would simmer all morning on the stove. "Look at these," her mother murmured, more to herself than to anyone else, holding up a bunch of parsley so the light from the window made it glow. So fresh. She smiled in that familiar, satisfied way, the way she did when something was just right. Liv watched her for a while, a crease of puzzled wonder between her brows. Finally, in a lull between customers, she couldn't keep the question inside any longer. She stepped closer, wiping her hands on her apron, and touched one of the leaves with the tip of her finger. It was cool and crisp against her skin, a little shock of life. "Mama," she asked quietly, "where did these come from? In weather like this, how can they be so fresh?" Her mother glanced up from counting coins into the till. "From Knut, of course," she said, as if the answer were obvious. "He brings us vegetables all winter, you know that." "But I thought he brought potatoes and carrots, things from storage. These looked like they were just picked." As on cue, Knut's voice drifted in from near the front counter, where he was adjusting his gloves and brushing the last of the snow from his sleeves. "That's because they were," he said, with a quiet chuckle. He turned to them, his face lined and weathered, but his eyes carrying a calm, steady kind of light. "Picked this morning, before the sun came up." Liv blinked at him. "Picked where?" she asked. "There's snow everywhere." Knut tilted his head, considering her for a moment. Then, with a little shrug, he answered, simply as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "From my little glass house on the hillside," he said. "The one tucked near the slope, just above the road out of town." He let the image hang there for a moment. A glass house on a winter hillside. Then added with a faint, almost secretive smile, "It's my greenhouse." The word settled between them like a small glowing coal. Greenhouse. in the middle of this frozen season, in a town that had almost forgotten what open soil looked like. Liv tried to picture it. She imagined a modest wooden frame wrapped in panels of glass, snow piled up along its sides, trying to climb the walls, and inside, against all logic, rows of plants leaning toward the weak winter light. She saw steam rising from pipes under the soil, quiet warmth seeping upward into the roots. Her mother was already nodding. "Knut's been growing for the town since before you were born," she said, reaching for another bundle of thyme. "Lettuce, kale, herbs, even a few strawberries when the conditions are right." He scratched his beard thoughtfully. "There are a few little tomatoes hanging on this week," he added. "They're not as sweet as summer ones, but they do their best." He smiled to himself, as if thinking of them with a sort of fond affection. Liv listened, her imagination running ahead of the words. She saw clusters of small red tomatoes glowing like lanterns above dark soil, fronds of dill drifting gently when someone brushed past, and pale green strawberry leaves catching drops of water as they fell from the tip of a watering can. She pictured a place that smelled of earth and leaves and warm, damp air, a place where winter stopped at the door and refused to come in. Her heart gave a small, eager flutter. In her mind, the town she'd always known rearranged itself just a little. The snow-covered streets and frozen harbor were still there, but now, just beyond the last row of houses, there was something else, something hidden. A glass house quietly lit from within, a secret pocket of green stitched in the edge of all this white. "If you grow all this through the winter," Liv began carefully, her voice soft, "it must be very warm inside." Knut's eyes crinkled. "Warm enough," he said. "Warm enough for the plants to keep going. They like their routine just like we do. Same hours of light, the right amount of water, a bit of extra help from the hillside." He didn't explain more than that, not yet. But Liv caught the faint suggestion of something else in his tone, as if behind the glass walls there was a whole quiet system, pipes and springs, and maybe even a whisper of the town's hot mineral waters helping to hold winter at bay. She looked again at the crate, at the herbs and leaves and the tiny droplets of water clinging to them. They no longer felt impossible, just mysterious in a gentler way. Somewhere deep inside, a thought rose and settled in her chest. "I want to see it. I want to stand inside that little glass house while the snow is still falling outside." The idea unfolded slowly, stretching out in her mind like a path covered in fresh snow. It wasn't a loud, urgent wish, just a quiet, steady tug, the first soft impulse to step toward something new, even if it was only a greenhouse on a hillside. By late morning, the rush had eased. The early customers had come and gone, leaving behind a faint trail of snowy footprints on the floorboards and a handful of empty cups by the window. Outside, the snow was still falling, but more lazily now, drifting down in slow spirals, as if the sky itself were getting sleepy. In the back of the bakery, things had settled into a quieter rhythm. A pot of soup murmured to itself on the stove, every so often sending up a little puff of steam that smelled of onions, herbs, and something green from Knut's crate. Liv and her mother stood side by side at the counter, slicing bread for lunchtime sandwiches. The soft thud of the knife against the wooden board, keeping a steady, soothing beat. Liv stole another glance at the remaining greens in the crate. Even after a whole morning of cooking, there were still enough leaves and herbs to look like the corner of a garden had somehow taken root in their kitchen. She hesitated, then let the question she'd been holding finally slip out. "Mama," she began, her voice gentle, "how does he do it? Growing all of this in the middle of winter?" Her mother smiled without looking up, fingers moving deftly as she cut a loaf into even slices. "With a lot of patience and a little help from the mountain," she said. She paused there, letting those words hang between them like a small secret. Liv turned toward her, curious. "The mountain," she echoed softly. Her mother nodded, sliding the sliced bread into a neat stack. "You remember the hot springs up the hill?" she said. "The ones Ulea looks after, the pools where the water steams even when the snow is falling the heaviest." Immediately, Liv's mind filled with the image of them. The stone baths half buried in snow, pale columns of steam rising into the cold air, people soaking in the warmth with flushed cheeks, while the world around them stayed frozen and still. "Well," her mother continued, "Knut had an idea years ago. He asked Ulea if there was a way to borrow just a little of that heat. She reached for a bowl of chopped herbs, sprinkling them slowly into the simmering soup. So now, a thin pipe runs from the springs all the way down to his greenhouse on the hillside. The hot water moves through the ground beneath the soil and then back again." She drew a small circle in the air with her fingertip, as if tracing the path of the pipes she was talking about. "Under the plants," she said softly, "it's like there's a warm blanket that never quite cools. The snow can pile as high as it likes on the roof, but underneath the roots stay comfortable." She listened, her hands growing still on the cutting board. She could see it so clearly. The steaming pools up on the slope where people eased their tired muscles into the hot mineral water, and below them, hidden from view, the same warmth slipping quietly into the earth, winding under the greenhouse like a secret glowing ribbon. The same heat that soothed cold skin and aching shoulders also wrapped itself around the roots of lettuce and kale, around delicate herbs and small stubborn fruits. Without Ulea's help, her mother went on, almost casually, Knut's plants would have a much harder time getting through the longest weeks of winter. He says the springs give the greenhouse a second kind of sun, the kind you feel from below instead of above. She chuckled softly at her own words, then gave the soup a slow, thoughtful stir. Liv found herself smiling too, even though the warmth stinging at the corners of her eyes wasn't entirely from the oven heat. Same water, she murmured almost to herself. One moment it's keeping people warm in the pools, and the next it's keeping the soil warm under the plants. She let the idea drift through her mind unhurried and gentle. It felt strangely comforting to imagine the town connected like that. The bathers in the steaming pools, the pipes beneath the hillside, the little glass house anchored in the snow, the herbs now floating in their soup, all of it threaded together by something invisible, moving slowly, steadily, carrying warmth from one place to another. Maybe that's why everything from his greenhouse tastes so alive. Hot spring water and patient hands. It's a good combination. Liv leaned her hip against the counter, fingers absently tracing a small ring of flour on the wood. In her mind, she watched the steam rise from a pool edged in snow, watched it drift upward into the cold air, and then imagined it slipping down somehow into the soil instead. The same warmth could become bath water, or could become soup, or could become leaves and fruit. The thought made something inside her loosen, like a knot coming undone. If all that heat can travel from the springs to the greenhouse, she thought quietly, maybe warmth in a life can move like that too, from one place to another, changing shape, helping things grow in ways you don't see right away. She didn't say any of that out loud. Instead, she let the feeling of it settle deep in her chest, where it could go on working in its own time. As she reached for another loaf, a new idea rose up, shy but certain. When we close this afternoon, she said slowly, I'm going to ask him. Her mother glanced over. Ask him what? She asked, though her corners of the mouth already hinted that she knew. If he'll let me see it, the greenhouse, the pipes, the way everything grows inside while the snow falls outside. She looked down at her hands, suddenly a little embarrassed by how much she wanted it. But only if he doesn't mind. Her mother's smile widened, soft and knowing. I don't think he'll mind at all, she said gently. You know Knut. He pretends he's grumpy about visitors, but he loves showing people how things grow. She bumped her shoulder lightly against Liv's. And who knows? Maybe it's good for the plants to have someone new say hello once in a while. Liv let out a small, quiet breath that was nearly a laugh. The decision, once made, settled inside her with a calm, steady weight, like smoothing a blanket over herself before sleep. She would ask him. Simple as that. By the time afternoon came, the light outside had begun to fade. In winter, the days in the Fjord town folded into evening so quickly that sometimes it felt as though the sun had only just climbed above the cliffs before it was already sinking again. Through the bakery window, the world had turned into a soft watercolor of grays and golds. Street lamps flickered on one by one, their glow spreading through the drifting snow, turning every flake into a tiny wandering spark. The air looked thicker somehow, as if the snow and light were mixing together. Inside, Liv and her mother moved through the familiar routine of closing, wiping down counters, covering trays, tucking the last loaves of bread into linen cloths so they would stay soft until morning. The sound of chairs being gently lifted and turned upside down onto tables echoed softly in the quiet shop. Just as Liv was reaching for the sign on the door to flip it from open to closed, the bell above the frame chimed again. She paused, hand in mid-air, as the cool breath of outside air curled around her wrist. A dusting of snow rode the draught inward, glittering for a moment in the light before melting into the floorboards. Knut stepped inside, shoulders dusted white. His hat was pulled low over his ears, and he carried nothing at all this time, except a small bundle of folded burlap tucked under one arm. "Just these," he said, lifting the bundle slightly. "Thought you might have a use for them. No sense throwing good sacks away." Liv's mother hastened forward with a grateful smile, taking the old flour bags from him. "Perfect for the log shed, and for covering the dough when it's very cold. Thank you." Knut shrugged modestly, brushing the last of the snow from his coat. "The path up to the greenhouse is getting slippery. I'll lay a few of these down outside the door. We don't want anyone sliding back down the hill before they make it inside." He said it lightly, but the picture his words painted made Liv's heart tap a little faster. This was it, her moment. For a second, she almost let it pass. She could feel the familiar shyness rise up, that small voice suggesting she wait, that maybe another day would be better, that perhaps it wasn't important enough to ask about. But the thought of the warm soil, the hot spring pipes, the rows of green under the glass roof rose up stronger. Before she could talk herself out of it, she stepped closer. "Knut," she began, feeling her throat go a little dry. He turned to her, brows lifting slightly in polite curiosity. "Yes, Liv," he said. She swallowed, then let the words come, simple and honest. "Could I—" She paused, then tried again. "Could I visit your greenhouse sometime? I've never seen anything so green in the middle of winter, and I keep thinking about it." She let the last few words fade into the quiet of the shop, her cheeks warming, though the air near the door was still cool. For a heartbeat, Knut only looked at her. There was a hint of surprise in his eyes, but no annoyance, no reluctance, just the measured stillness of someone who hadn't quite expected a question, but was turning it over seriously. Then, slowly, his expression softened into something bright and open. "Well now," he said, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I suppose the plants could use a new admirer. They must be tired of only hearing my voice." He glanced toward the window, where the snow was thickening into veils, soft and constant. "Tomorrow morning," he suggested. "Say 10 o'clock. The snow will probably be even heavier by then, which only makes it cozier inside. You'll see." Liv's breath escaped in a small, happy rush she hadn't meant to let anyone hear. 10 o'clock is perfect," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper, but steady. I'd really love that." Her mother watched the exchange from behind the counter, eyes warm, a quiet pride hidden in her gentle smile. Knut pulled his hat down a little more firmly over his ears, already halfway into the snow. "He'd dress warmly for the walk up the hill," he said, opening the door again. "But don't worry. Once you're inside, you'll probably want to take your scarf off." He lifted a hand in a small wave. "Until tomorrow, then." The bell chimed once more as the door closed behind him. His figure blurred quickly into the white outside, swallowed by the snow and the soft glow of the street lamps. Liv stood for a moment facing the window, watching the gentle whirl of flakes drifting past the glass. Somewhere beyond the last houses, beyond the dim outline of the road leading up the hillside, a small glass house waited, warm and bright, stitched into the winter like a secret. Inside her chest, something quietly unfolded, a feeling she hadn't held for a long time. The simple, clear anticipation of tomorrow. Not the heavy kind of waiting, full of questions about the future and what she should be doing with her life, but a lighter kind, like the way she had once waited as a child for a school trip or for a visit to a place she had only ever seen in her imagination. Later that night, when she would be lying in her attic bed, staring at the sloping ceiling while the snow tapped softly at the window, she knew her mind would wander again and again to that greenhouse, to the pipes under the earth, to the leaves glowing softly in the warmth, to the way the snow must look, piled against the outside of the glass. For now, though, she simply let the promise of tomorrow settle gently over her, like a second blanket, soft and comforting, a quiet invitation waiting in the snow. Morning came wrapped in a soft, pale light, the kind of light that doesn't so much shine as gently seep into the world, turning the edges of roofs and fences into quiet silhouettes. By the time Liv stepped out of the house, the town was already drifting under another fresh layer of snow. She had pulled on her thickest wool sweater, then her coat, then her scarf wound twice around her neck. Her boots were laced tightly, the leather a little stiff from yesterday's cold. The air met her in a cool, steady hush. No sharp wind, just a slow, constant falling of flakes, like someone was patiently shaking a feather pillow high above the fjord. She closed the front door behind her with a gentle click and began to walk. The path from the town center toward the hillside wound between small wooden houses and low fences. Most of the fences were half buried now, their tops softened by snow, as if someone had laid a thick white quilt across them. Liv brushed her gloved hand along one rail as she passed, feeling her fingers sink into the cold softness, then lifted them away, leaving a shallow trail. Every step she took made a deep, satisfying sound, a slow crunch, then another and another. Her boots sank into the snow, leaving neat prints behind her that the falling flakes immediately began to blur. The town around her seemed quieter than usual, not empty, just calm. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, curling upward in thin gray ribbons that disappeared into the light sky. A dog barked once far away, then fell silent again. As she walked, the streets began to narrow, houses giving way to more open spaces. Ahead, the slope of the hillside rose gently, its trees wearing heavy white coats. And just above that, like a faint ghostly veil, Liv saw it. A band of pale mist hovered over part of the hill. Not quite cloud, not quite smoke, something in between. It rose from somewhere near the hot springs, drifting into the cold air, and then slowly dissolving, as if the sky were quietly breathing it in. From a distance, the steam blended with the low clouds, soft and seamless, but Liv knew what it was. She remembered the way that mist felt on her skin when she had visited the springs before, warm and damp, carrying the faint mineral scent of deep, hidden water. Today that same warmth was traveling beneath the ground as well, down through pipes and soil toward the little glass house she was heading for. The road grew steeper under her feet, and the houses thinned out. Soon she was passing the edge of the hot springs facilities, their wooden railings and stone pools tucked into the hillside like secret pockets of warmth. She paused for a moment on the path, watching a thin column of steam drift up from behind a low wall. The air there felt just a touch softer against her cheeks, as if the cold had been gently mixed with something kinder. A small metal hatch stood nearby in the snow, its edges carefully cleared. On it, someone had painted a simple symbol in bright blue paint, a curling line that looked like steam turning into a tiny leaf. Underneath, in neat lettering, were a few words, and Liv recognized the handwriting at once. Olia's. She smiled without meaning to. Of course. The Springs director had always liked drawing little signs and symbols, labeling pipes so visitors wouldn't trip over them, making the unseen pathways of water feel a bit more friendly. As Liv straightened up to walk on, a movement caught her eye. Farther up the slope, near a cluster of pipes and valves, a figure in a padded jacket and wool hat was checking a gauge. Even from here she could tell it was Olia, the way she stood with one foot slightly turned out, the careful, deliberate way she leaned in to read the numbers. Olia looked up as if she had felt someone watching. She shaded her eyes with a gloved hand, then lifted her arm high and waved, her gesture big and easy in the soft light. "Straight ahead," she called, her voice drifting down through the quiet air. "Keep going that way. You'll see a glass roof half buried in snow. That's Knut's little paradise." Her laughter followed the words, bright and warm, before being gently absorbed by the snow and the open space. Liv laughed softly in return, lifting a hand in thanks. Then she turned back to the path and continued upward. With every step she took, the town behind her seemed to fall further away. Not in distance exactly, but in feeling. The streets and shops and familiar corners receded into a kind of soft blur in her mind, and ahead of her an image grew clearer instead, of a place she had never seen but had been imagining since yesterday. A greenhouse tucked into the hillside, its roof shimmering faintly under a crust of snow. A secret pocket of green, breathing quietly in the cold. She felt a small fluttering tightness in her chest, a mixture of nerves and something else that felt suspiciously like excitement. It reminded her of the morning of a long-ago school trip, when she had stood by the door with her backpack, heart beating just a little bit faster than usual, waiting for the bus that would take her somewhere new.
But here there was no bus, only the sound of her boots in the snow, the distant murmur of hot water moving unseen beneath the ground, and the steady, pale sky overhead. Outside, it was all winter, snow and grey, and the thin whistle of wind through bare branches. And yet, step by step, she was walking toward a place that might smell like wet earth and leaves, a place where the air might hold the memory of summer. The thought made her smile, small and quiet, as she followed the narrowing path up the hillside. It didn't appear all at once. For a while, all Liv could see was the hillside itself, the slope stitched with small, snow-laden trees, the occasional dark rock peeking through the white, and the soft, continuous falling of flakes. Then, as she rounded a gentle bend in the path, something new emerged ahead of her. At first, it looked like just another patch of snow lying unusually flat in one spot. But as she drew closer, she noticed straight lines beneath it, a faint grid of edges and angles where snow clung in thicker ridges along invisible beams. The greenhouse. Half buried up to its sides, it sat snugly in a shallow cut of the hill, its glass panels wearing a heavy cap of snow like a hat pulled low. Only the upper part of the roof was clearly visible, and even there most of the panes were frosted over in a soft, opaque white. But here and there, in slender, wandering shapes, the snow had melted away. Narrow, transparent paths traced their way down the glass, where warmer air inside pressed gently against the cold outside. Through those clear ribbons, the light from within glimmered faintly. Not bright, but present, a pale, steady glow behind the glass. She stopped for a moment, just to look. The greenhouse seemed both small and extraordinary. A quiet, breathing thing tucked into the snow, like a lantern someone had half buried for safekeeping. She stepped onto a section of ground where sacks of old flour cloth had been laid to keep the snow from turning too slippery. Her boots sank just enough to feel secure. The air felt colder here, pressed more closely around her, and she could hear the distant, low murmur of water rushing through pipes somewhere under the earth. In front of her, a simple wooden door was set into the side of the structure, its frame reinforced with metal, a sturdy handle darkened by years of use. A few icicles hung from the edge of the roof nearby, catching what little daylight there was. She reached for the handle, fingers closing around the cold metal. For a heartbeat, she simply stood there, feeling the weight of the moment, balanced between two worlds. Behind her, winter. Ahead, something she could only guess at.
We'll leave Liv here for tonight, standing at the edge of this winter greenhouse, with warm air on her cheeks and snow still falling quietly outside. In our next story, we'll follow her deeper inside to discover what has been patiently growing there all these years. For now, You don't need to go anywhere. Just stay where you are. Let your body grow heavy, and let the soft hush of this snowy fjord town carry you into sleep. Thank you for listening, and good night.